SQL MCP Server. What is it? How does it work? And what does it have to do with Data API Builder 2.0? Learn all about it this week on Data Exposed. Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome back to Data Exposed. Today, I'm joined once again by Jerry. Jerry, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. I love talking about Data API Builder, especially our new MCP capabilities.
Great, awesome, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So, for viewers who don't know about Data API Builder, we do have another episode where Jerry tells us all about Data API Builder and how to get started, what it's for, what's new. So, we'll link to that in the description below. But we wanted to have this special episode to dive into MCP, which is kind of the latest thing in Data API Builder. Without further ado, Jerry, can you tell us a little bit? Maybe starting with like, why did we add the MCP entry point here in Data API Builder?
Yeah, I think the why is important. Let me start one step back just with the name. So SQL MCP Server, that is the tool we're really talking about. That is another name for Data API Builder with MCP capabilities turned on.
Okay.
So that's important for us because nobody searched for Data API Builder with MCP capabilities, but everybody searched for SQL MCP Server. So it was important for us just to have a way for discovery. But when you see SQL MCP Server, just know it's still Data API Builder, just a second name for the same engine. Why would we add MCP capabilities to an engine that was basically REST and GraphQL for apps? Why would we enable agents in this way? Part of the reason is if you have an agent or a wrapper around an LLM model, that agent wants to interact with the data. Maybe it's through like the RAG pattern to be able to give you more information that it doesn't have automatically. And in order to do that, it has to query the database. But in order to query the database, there has to be something in between the agent and the database. And that just doesn't exist. There's no agent that can automatically talk to a database. So you have to create this in-between service. That service needs to be able to talk some sort of standard that an agent can understand. And that's what MCP is. It's the standard for agents to interact with services. So we added MCP capabilities to Data API Builder, basically making it so an agent could do anything an app could do. And an app through Data API Builder could create, read, update, delete any of the tables that you want to have exposed, as well as execute store procedures inside of your database also. This means, you could dial it back so it can barely do anything, or you could dial it up to 11 so that your agent can do everything. It's really up to you. But what's cool is once we added our MCP capability, we included by default then all of the security aspects inside of DAB. So we already have an abstraction layer that makes it so that the entire schema of your database is not leaked into your agent. And also we have an entire authentication model that not only incoming auth, but also authorization into the database, as well as custom predicates and policies, all of these things that we had spent years building in the Data API Builder now by de facto here are just part of the MCP capabilities too, which means you should be a little nervous when you are giving database access to your agent, because an agent, because it has this kind of stochastic like personality of randomness and chaos, makes it so that when you ask it to do something, it's not deterministic. You never really know what the result is going to be. You can start to narrow that down and make it more reliable, but you can never make it as deterministic as like an if-then statement in an application. However, wouldn't it be great if you're going to rely on an agent to do something and that thing it's going to do is inside of a database, wouldn't it be great if the thing in between was a guardian that gave you guardrails and a surface area that is like limits on how much exposure you have and what can actually be done in the database. And that's why SQL MCP Server is unique from every MCP server that tries to interact with a database. We have an abstraction layer, we have an authentication model, and all these other capabilities that throttle usage, that can limit the rows executed, the columns returned, that nothing else can really do. And so now you have enterprises, we have many Microsoft customers who are like, oh, we need an agentic solution. Now we need an agentic strategy. How do we protect our data and keep it so
Totally.
that things don't go crazy? Because you've heard these crazy stories of like drop table, drop database. That's not That is not even on the table with SQL MCP Server because that sort of capability would never be translated into the database for you. And so that by itself is pretty awesome. I mean, it's really awesome. Let me take a second and just kind of show you a quick little demo of getting started because SQL MCP Server is Data API Builder. So I can still take the Omnibus extension and I can say initialize DAB with just a standard connection string into my database. It runs the exact same cross-platform CLI commands to create the JSON file, and that is the only thing you need for SQL MCP Server to work. It deploys as a container, and you mount this one file to it, and when you do, that is how it knows how to connect to the database, and it also that is how it knows which objects to expose or not to expose, and then which columns and which users get what and which roles and how to use your OAuth tokens. All of that can be inside of that JSON file, how you control the entire thing. And so unlike code generation or something along those lines, this is a dynamic engine that builds this endpoint for you kind of automatically. And because SQL MCP Server is DAB, it is also open source and free, which means you can go to our repository, you can look at our code, see how we implemented all of this, and you can see that we didn't do anything special. This is how you would have done it. You just don't have to spend the time and money to go and do it. Right, so that's the nice part. So let me add one table real quick, just so you can sort of see my little to-do sample here. And when I do, this JSON file, which is the DAB JSON file, now has the ability to enable REST. I mean, I'm sorry, now has the ability to enable MCP, which is by
Mhm.
default. And so then I can granularly go to every table. So if I scroll down to where that to-do, here's the to-do being added to the file. And I can go into it and I can see all of its fields or its columns are here present. And they also have a description, which allows me to go in and give really rich semantic information to the model so that when it's interacting with the table, it knows precisely what it's supposed to do with this column, what type of data goes into it, what shape it's supposed to be, the formula that's there, anything along that lines that I think would help a model behave even better. And I can also give it an alias, which isn't really here, but I can just show you. I can add an alias name, alias. There we go, and make it so that if I'm making everything a key, but I know it needs to
Mhm.
be an ID or something like that, or I've inherited a terrible name from a mainframe or something like that, I can do that as well. But what I wanted to show you is I can come down and I can I can individually control whether or not this table shows up in graph and rest. And in the exact same way, I can decide whether or not this is participating in MCP. And so I could say, for example, I might have 20 tables. I
Mhm.
want all of them to be exposed through REST for my application, but just this one. And so I might turn it off. Just that one is exposed to my agent. And so it's a neat capability to make it so that I can turn it on over everything and then one by one go into each of my tables, views, or store procedures, either one, and I can turn them on and off. And I can also add all this semantic information to make it so my MCP server is even more effective. So really cool. Now, if I were to add this, so let me just show you one other thing that is at least worth kind of showing. I can install this MCP server directly into VS Code, right? So this is so I can use it locally in my local
Mhm.
developer loop. And so if I do, I'll install it into the workspace. It just adds this quick little MCP JSON file. This is standard in VS Code, nothing to do with Data API Builder, but this is how we do it. What's nice though is now that I have it, I can go in and I can see all of the MCP servers I have installed for this agent that I'm about to interact with. And one of them is the SQL MCP server, which shows up
Nice.
because of doing this. What's neat is these 8 tools that show up under it. If I have a small database with 1 or 2 tables, I will get all 8 of these tables that'll allow me to run complicated aggregations against those tables, allow me to create, read, update, delete, execute a store procedure. But perhaps most interesting is this one right here that is describe entities that allows my model not to receive an entire schema of my database,
Yeah.
but instead receive this small subset intended just for the operations available to it. So if I have this small database with 10 tables, these are the tools I have. But if I have a gigantic database with 10,000
Right.
tables, these are also the only tools I have, making it so that we don't overwhelm the context window of your model by giving it so much information about your schema that it just can't proceed anywhere. And so it's just a tremendous approach to make it so that regardless of the scale of your backend database, your front end agent can still interact with it in a way that you can kind of rely on it, because only when we blow out the context window do we start to see things like hallucinations. And this allows us to contain it so that we don't do it. By the way, we have the ability to turn all of these off individually. We can turn one tool at a time off if you'd never want to have delete, for example, exposed, or you can turn them all off and take stored procedures and elevate those to be tools instead. So it's really up to the developer. Like, what's the surface area that you want for your MCP
Mhm.
server to have? We kind of meet you wherever you want to be. And this is the agentic solution that is easily proven because Data API Builder has been around for years. And so now we have Data API Builder 2.0, and 2.0 really is 2.0 with SQL MCP Server. So if you're wanting to use SQL MCP Server, look at the release of 2.0 or later of Data API Builder. I think we're on 2.0.9 today. And it's just, we're just tweaking all of these little things along the way. 2.1 is just a month or so away. A lot of cool capabilities coming in too. This is really a neat product with a lot of capabilities. The fact that it's free from Microsoft, secured by Microsoft, supported by Microsoft, like all of these cool capabilities and kind of side effects that you have of us writing it, but still providing it to you as open source. Pretty amazing.
Awesome. This is great. Yeah, I love it, and I've gotten to play with it a little bit, and it just kind of works. And I enjoy using it, and it's really easy to get started. I would say like over the years since it first became it is now much easier to get started. So that's definitely one of the things I noticed, as well as it's very complete. So I think most developers are going to be excited to try it out. So Jerry, thanks so much for coming on the show. I learned a lot. I bet our viewers did as well. If you're watching this episode, go ahead, give it a like, leave us a comment, let us know if you've tried this out before and what you plan on using it for. We'll put some links in the description for you to learn more, including the link to the episode we did right before this one last week on Data API Builder 2.0, so you can dive into that a little bit deeper. And we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.